There's a fruit tree native to America that grows the largest fruit of any tree on the continent. Tastes like a mix of banana and mango, and it's almost never sold in a single grocery store in the country. Fruit trees hide surprises like that in almost every ordinary backyard orchard, and this video answers one simple question. Which fruit trees actually make the most sense to plant at home? And what does each one really need in order to thrive? Grab a coffee because a few of these might completely change what ends up going in the yard this spring. Pawpaw. Most people have never even heard of this one, which is strange considering it holds a real title. The pawpaw is the largest edible fruit native to North America, and its custard-like flesh genuinely tastes like a cross between banana, mango, and pineapple, unlike anything else growing wild on this continent. Despite that incredible flavor, almost nobody has tasted a pawpaw fresh because the fruit bruises easily and spoils within just a few days of ripening, which makes it nearly impossible to ship or sell in a regular grocery store. That short shelf life is really the whole reason this native fruit slipped out of the American diet over the last century, even though it once fed entire communities. The pawpaw is native from northern Florida all the way up to southern Canada, so it handles cold winters just fine, and it prefers full to part sun with moist, well-drained soil, often thriving best in the dappled shade near a riverbank or the edge of a wooded property. A young tree usually takes about 4 to 8 years before it produces its first real harvest. One important detail worth knowing before planting is that a single pawpaw tree will not fruit on its own at all. Two genetically different pawpaw trees need to grow near each other for proper pollination. So anyone hoping for a harvest should plan on planting a pair rather than a lone tree. The trees themselves grow to about 20 to 25 feet tall, so they do need a bit of real space, though they also do well tucked into a partly shaded understory spot beneath taller trees, which makes them surprisingly forgiving of an imperfect planting site. Pawpaw trees also have almost no serious pest or disease problems, and deer tend to leave the leaves alone entirely. This fruit has serious history behind it too. Both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grew pawpaws and loved them, and Jefferson was so taken with the fruit that he had pawpaw seeds shipped all the way to France in 1786. During the Great Depression, pawpaws were sometimes eaten as a free, wild substitute for other fruits, earning them the nickname "poor man's banana" in parts of the rural South. Because this fruit still doesn't ship or store well even today, growing a pawpaw tree at home may be the only realistic way most people will ever get to taste one of America's own native fruits, fig. Most people know it as the soft, sweet fruit found dried in trail mix or fresh in a market bin, often paired with cheese or honey on a cheese board. There's a strange botanical secret hiding inside every single one. A fig is not really a fruit in the way an apple or a peach is a fruit. It is actually an inside-out flower cluster, with hundreds of tiny flowers blooming inside the fig itself, instead of out in the open air the way most blossoms do, which is why slicing one open reveals a pattern that almost looks like a cross-section of a small strawberry. The good news for home gardeners is that most common backyard varieties, like brown turkey and black mission, are self-pollinating and do not need the famous fig wasp at all to produce fruit. So nobody growing a fig tree in a typical backyard needs to think about that relationship. Fig trees also handle a surprising range of climates. Chicago hardy figs can survive temperatures down to -10 degrees Fahrenheit as long as the roots are protected through winter with a thick layer of mulch. And in colder regions, figs can even be grown in large containers and simply wheeled indoors when frost threatens. A young fig tree usually starts producing within 2 to 3 years of planting, which is faster than many other fruit trees, and it can be kept as a large shrub or a small tree through regular pruning, making it one of the more compact, space-friendly choices for a home garden, even on a small lot. In warm climates, a single fig tree can even produce 2 separate harvests in 1 year, an early crop on last year's wood, followed by a larger main crop later in the season. Big trees also produce an enzyme called phycin that helps digest protein, which is part of how the plant handles any insect that wanders inside and never leaves. So the next time someone slices open a fresh fig at the table, they are not really looking at seeds tucked inside fruit flesh. They are looking directly into what used to be a flower. Apple. Most people know it as the single most iconic fruit tree in America, the one behind pies, cider, and lunchbox snacks everywhere. There is a genetic trick to this tree that most people never think about. An apple tree does not grow true from seed, meaning every single seed inside an apple carries a completely different genetic combination than its parent tree. So planting a seed from a favorite apple will almost never grow into the same variety again and could just as easily grow into something small and bitter. This is actually the real story behind Johnny Appleseed. John Chapman spent decades planting apple orchards from seed across the American frontier, and the fruit those trees produced was small, sour, and mostly used for hard cider rather than eating fresh off the branch. Every apple variety sold in stores today, from Honeycrisp to Gala, exists only because someone found one exceptional tree and then grafted cuttings from it onto new rootstock, since grafting is the only way to reliably copy a specific apple's exact genetics. Apple trees need a real period of winter chill to fruit well, and they generally thrive anywhere from Zone 3 through Zone 8, depending on the variety chosen. Standard trees take 4 to 8 years to bear their first real crop, while grafted dwarf varieties can start fruiting in as little as 2 to 3 years, which appeals to gardeners who don't want to wait nearly a decade for their first harvest. Apple trees also respond well to yearly pruning, which keeps the canopy open and makes the fruit easier to reach come autumn. Most apple varieties also need a second, different apple tree growing nearby for proper cross-pollination to occur. Standard trees need real room, 20 to 30 feet of space, but dwarf varieties fit comfortably into much smaller yards and can even be trained flat against a fence in a technique called espalier, which turns the tree into a living, fruit-bearing wall. The apples Johnny Chapman actually carried across the frontier were what people at the time called spitters, far too sour to eat fresh and grown specifically for turning into hard cider rather than snacking straight off the branch. Ironically, that same genetic unpredictability he embraced is credited with helping produce many of the hardy, disease-resistant apple varieties still grown across America today. Pear. Most people know it as the classic Bartlett or Bosc pear sitting in the produce aisle, familiar and simple-looking. This is one of the very few fruits where the obvious approach is actually the wrong one. A pear should never be left to ripen on the tree at all. If a pear is allowed to soften while still hanging on the branch, the inside actually turns mealy and grainy rather than sweet and juicy, ruining the exact texture growers are trying to protect. Because of this, growers always pick pears while they are still firm and slightly underripe, then let them finish softening afterward on the kitchen counter, sometimes tucked into a paper bag to speed the process along. Pear trees thrive across zones 4 through 8, and standard trees usually take 4 to 6 years to bear their first fruit, with dwarf varieties fruiting a little sooner than that. Most pear varieties need a second compatible pear tree growing nearby for good pollination, so planting just one alone often leads to disappointing results and very little actual fruit at harvest time, a common early mistake for new gardeners. One especially reassuring detail for anyone planting a pear tree is just how long-lived they are. It is not unusual to find productive pear trees well over 100 years old, still bearing fruit generation after generation of the same family, often outlasting the people who first planted them. The real trick to knowing when to pick a pear is not softness at all. It is a gentle lift and twist test. If the fruit separates easily from the branch with just a light twist, it is ready to come off the tree and finish ripening indoors. This single quirk is exactly why pears are almost never sold tree-ripe in stores, and why a rock-hard pear from the grocery bag just needs a few patient days, sitting in a paper bag on the counter before it is ready to eat. Winter varieties like Anjou take this even further, needing a stretch of cold storage first before they will ripen properly at all. Cherry. Most people know it as sweet Bing cherries for snacking straight out of the bag, or tart Montmorency cherries baked into a pie. Here is something that trips up a lot of first-time cherry growers. Sweet and tart cherries do not reliably pollinate each other, even though they come from the same general family and often bloom around the same time in spring. Nearly all tart cherry varieties are self-fertile and need absolutely no partner tree at all to produce fruit, which makes them wonderfully forgiving for a small yard. Sweet cherries are a different story entirely, since most sweet varieties require a second, genetically different sweet cherry tree growing nearby before they will set any fruit at all. Sweet cherries need warmer conditions, generally zones 5 through 9 with dry summers, while tart cherries are noticeably hardier and do well in zones 4 through 8, tolerating harsher winters without complaint. Sweet varieties usually take 4 to 7 years to bear their first crop, while tart varieties often fruit a bit sooner, closer to 3 to 5 years from planting. Standard cherry trees need real space, 35 to 40 feet between trees, though dwarf varieties fit into a yard with just 8 to 10 feet of room, a far more realistic footprint for most home gardens, and one reason dwarf cherries have become so popular in recent years. There is good news for smaller properties, too. A few modern sweet cherry varieties, like Stella, were specifically bred to be self-fertile, which solves the two-tree problem entirely for anyone working with a tighter space. For most home gardeners without room for a full orchard, choosing a tart variety like Montmorency is often the simplest path to a guaranteed harvest, since it can produce reliably from just one single tree, standing alone in the yard. Cherry trees also do not typically need their fruit thinned out during the season, which makes them a bit less fussy than some of the other trees on this list. Persimmon. Most people know it only vaguely as an autumn fruit, something spotted occasionally at a farmer's market with a shape somewhere between a tomato and a squash. This fruit plays a genuine trick on anyone who eats it too early. An underripe American persimmon is so intensely astringent that biting into just one can make the entire inside of the mouth feel like it is shrinking and drying out all at once, an experience persimmon growers describe as genuinely unforgettable. Yet that exact same fruit, once left to fully ripen until it is nearly mushy and soft, transforms into something that tastes like rich caramel custard, with almost none of that harshness left behind. American persimmons are genuinely cold hardy, thriving across zones 4 through 9, while the sweeter Asian varieties like Fuyu need milder conditions in zones 7 through 10 and cannot handle a harsh winter. American types grown from seed can take 6 to 10 years to fruit, though grafted trees produce much faster than that, often cutting the weight in half. Once established, persimmon trees need very little ongoing care, since they have very few serious pests or diseases to worry about, making them one of the lowest maintenance trees on this entire list for a busy home gardener. American persimmons often need a second tree nearby for pollination, while many Asian varieties are conveniently self-fertile on their own and need no partner tree at all. The tree's scientific name carries its own quiet poetry, too. Diosporos literally translates from Greek to fruit of the gods, or divine fruit. American persimmons traditionally ripen right around Thanksgiving, which makes growing one at home feel less like ordinary gardening and more like tending a genuinely seasonal, holiday-timed harvest. Deer and other wildlife tend to leave the tree alone until the fruit is fully ripe, which is one small, built-in form of natural pest protection: plum. Most people know it as the purple or red fruit sitting in the produce aisle, sweet and juicy with that familiar tart skin. Here is a detail that surprises even people who eat dried plums regularly. Not every plum can become a prune. Only certain firm, high-sugar European varieties can be dried without fermenting on the inside, which means the words plum and prune are not actually describing two different fruits at all. They are describing the exact same fruit at two different stages of its life, one fresh and one dried. European plums thrive across zones 5 through 9 and tend to be more self-pollinating and lower maintenance overall, making them a fairly relaxed, forgiving choice for a first-time fruit tree grower who wants results without much fuss. Japanese plums need slightly warmer conditions, zones 6 through 10, and usually require a second tree nearby for proper pollination to set a good crop. Both types generally fruit within 3 to 5 years of planting, which is fairly quick compared to many other fruit trees on this list. Standard plum trees need about 15 to 20 feet of space, while dwarf varieties fit comfortably into a much smaller yard or even a large container. There is an enormous amount of variety within this one fruit, too. Over 2,000 documented plum varieties exist worldwide, giving plums more genetic diversity than almost any other stone fruit grown today. So the next time someone eats a wrinkled, chewy prune, they are actually eating the exact same species of fruit as a fresh, juicy plum sitting on a grocery shelf. It was simply picked from a variety specifically bred to survive the drying process without spoiling or fermenting. Most of the plums that end up dried into prunes in the United States trace back to a single variety brought over from France in the 1850s. Peach. Most people know it as the classic juicy summer fruit, a backyard staple across the South and well beyond it. Crack open a peach pit sometime, and something odd is waiting inside. The kernel looks almost identical to a raw almond, and that resemblance is not a coincidence at all. Peach and almond trees are close enough relatives that they share a nearly identical genetic blueprint, both belonging to the same small branch of the Prunus family tree. The real difference is that the peach kernel contains a compound that converts into cyanide inside the body, while almonds were selectively bred over thousands of years specifically to remove that same toxin from their seeds. Peaches were simply never bred that way. So the bitter kernel inside a peach pit still carries that natural defense today, exactly as it always has. Peach trees need zones 5 through 9, along with a specific number of winter chill hours each year in order to fruit properly and set a good crop. Most peach varieties are conveniently self-fertile and do not need a second tree at all to produce fruit, which simplifies planting enormously for a small yard. Standard trees also fruit remarkably fast, often within just 2 to 4 years of planting, among the quickest of any tree on this entire list, which makes peaches a satisfying choice for anyone eager for a first harvest. Dwarf varieties fit well into smaller yards, and peaches genuinely benefit from yearly pruning to keep the canopy open for good sun exposure and airflow, which also helps prevent disease. A single peach pit kernel swallowed by accident is very unlikely to cause any real harm, though intentionally eating a handful of crushed kernels is a genuine documented poisoning risk worth avoiding entirely. In the end, the almond sold in stores and the almond hiding quietly inside every peach pit are botanically almost the same seed. One simply had its poison carefully bred out of it over thousands of years, and the other never did. Nectarines, for what it's worth, are simply a smooth skin type of peach, not a separate fruit at all. Thank you for watching. If you want another story right now, there is one waiting for you on your screen. And if you enjoyed this one, subscribe so you never miss the next.